Kevin, thank you so much for coming on my show. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I've read a lot about your story, and I think it's truly inspiration. I think others need to hear it as well.
Ken, it's a delight to be with you this morning. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So, to begin, for those of us who don't know you, if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin McShan. I'm 32 years old. I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. It just simply means that I don't have an oxygen in my legs to walk normally. I'm a disability advocate. I also host a podcast called Let's Have This Conversation. In the past, I've done some job development for individuals with disabilities and employers to get connected. So I'm all about inclusion of all people in order to give all people a voice for those that don't have the platform to speak for themselves.
What made you want to begin to do something like this?
Well, Ken, I'll tell you, I live by the mantra that inclusion is the gateway to independence. And I strongly believe that as a journalist and as an individual, that everyone um, has a uniquely special story in which to share. And it's my mission in life to promote equality and acceptance of all people, regardless of social, economic, physical ability, or race or gender in life. So I guess for me, I believe that everyone deserves to have a place in the world, and that's sort of the origin of why I'm passionate about the work that I do.
Yeah, and I can see that you are tremendously passionate about all of the things that you do. And you promote employment equality for those who have similar disabilities. So I was wondering if you can talk to me a little bit more about, how you go about that, or, what made you want to start doing that.
Yeah, sure. So I used to serve as the regional ambassador for the Discoverability Network, which is the province of Ontario's online job matching portal for individuals with disabilities and employers to get connected. And one of the things we found when the project was launched that 77% of medium and small sized businesses would be willing to hire people with disabilities, but they didn't know where to find them. So our Chamber of Commerce here in Ontario created, along with the Disability Services Department of at Ryerson University, they created this platform which allows employers and individuals with disabilities to get connected. It's a completely free resource. When I worked on the project, I called it the e-harmony of employment. The only difference is instead of dating, it was intended to be for employment. And I think the biggest reason I got into this was because people with disabilities, it's been shown, have I think it's something like $55 billion of disposable income when they work, and
Really?
yeah, and people with disabilities deserve to have the same rights and responsibilities as anybody else. And the biggest way you include them into society is by giving them a chance to work, right? So, one of
Hmm.
my missions in life is to make sure that the equal acceptance of all people is afforded. And the easiest way you can do that is providing them a pathway to employment, because then you provide them with financial independence, societal independence, and you also increase their self-confidence as well.
Hmm. Speaking of self-confidence, you have a lot of self-confidence from what I can see. And that's really telling. in my personal opinion. For someone who has a disability such as yourself, I can assume that many people would not be so confident as to host a podcast, for example, or do the kinds of things that you do on network the way you network. How did you manage to, for yourself, how did you manage to get to this level of confidence and gain this type of following? Because you have a pretty substantial following on your podcast as well.
Yeah, so I'll share this story with you. It's a story that I've shared on other podcasts before, but I believe that it's relevant. So it was about 1998. I had just completed my final surgery um, to deal with my disabilities, and the doctors had told my parents that this would be my final leg surgery, and there was nothing else they could do to help me in that regard. And it wasn't something that I had initially taken to bear initially, because I wanted to have a normal childhood and a normal upbringing. And I'll tell you also that I went to school for sports journalism, and one of the reasons I got into journalism was because I couldn't play sports. The next best thing for me was to report on them. But back to my story, it was 1998. I had returned from London, and my principal had seen that I was struggling to accept the fact that my parents were told I'd probably never walk normally without AIDS. And the principal at the time, her name was Carol Crawley, and she called me, or Carol Crewley, and she had called me into her office, and she had listened to all of the things that the doctor had told my parents, and why I was beside myself on not being able to do what my counterparts did. And then she took me aside after the meeting, and she said to me that the only thing that the only limitations that you have in life are those that you place on yourself, and you have just about just as much equal opportunity as anyone else to make a positive contribution to the world.
Wise words.
And it stuck with me. And ever since that meeting, I've tried to instill to others that we lead by example of our living instead of the example of our problems. So I've tried to lead by example of what I've tried to do personally before I ask anyone else to sort of adopt my philosophy. I want to be a leader in terms of making change and having a positive impact on the world.
And you do. You have had a tremendous impact. I seen your podcast and I've seen the following which you have. You have a pretty substantial following as well. So I think it's fantastic, all the work that you're doing. And every single, every single one of us has confidence issues, really. And to see someone like yourself just take that and just, throw it in the back seat and be like, I'm just going to go and do whatever I need to do to make a change in this world. I think that is extremely, extremely commendable. So kudos to you on that.
Well, thank you. And I think that someone told me in a podcast that I recently did that we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And her name was Allison Jackson, and she's a competitive figure competitor. And she's 47, and she didn't start competing professionally until she was 40. And she had told me that we um, all have the same 24 hours, and it's all incumbent upon all of us to use those 24 hours to make the biggest impact in the world. And I think the same philosophy can be applied to my life. I always tell people that I'm not a big person that likes to make excuses, because in my view excuses are an artificial deterrent to progress, because we're all given circumstances in life and we all have to overcome adversity, right? So I think the way we play our cards and the way we spend our 24 hours is essentially important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's I totally agree with that. That is those are definitely wise words. So you went and became a journalist. What kind of journalism really piques your interest?
So originally, I was a sports reporter, and then I started my current podcast because I wanted to challenge myself um, as a journalist and as a person to cover a number of different topics. I specifically love sports journalism, but I've also evolved to being a more of a complete journalist in the sense that I pride myself in wanting to cover a little bit of everything, because I think being cognizant of the world around us and what's happening is essentially important to being not only a good journalist, but an educated citizen. So through my podcast, I try to cover a variety of subjects that are important to the societal discussion of today. And I tell people that journalism for me is like oxygen. It's sort of like my lifeblood, because I believe that storytelling and the power of objective journalism is a marker of the arc of history, right? People
Hmm.
consume news in so many different ways now, and and part of why I wanted to be an objective voice in this regard was because I love talking to people and engaging in conversations, and hopefully I've been a source of inspiration, but not only inspiration, but a source of um, equitable knowledge, if you will, where people uh, can come away on what I'm reporting on and say, uh, I'll be a better person because I heard this from this podcast, and I want to try and implement what I've learned to be a better person.
I agree. I think objective journalism is definitely necessary in today's world where everyone is just so divided and butting heads with each other. And having someone like yourself who speaks very objectively and looks at both sides of the argument, I think is tremendously important in this day and age, really. So, um, when you cover certain topics, what kind of topics do you really enjoy?
I've really gotten into. There's a section on my YouTube channel called "People and Their Stories," and I talk to a bunch of people about their entrepreneurial stories and their personal stories of triumph and tragedy. I'm thinking of a gentleman I interviewed right before Christmas. His name's Jesse Diaz, and he had recent. He was he, he's 30 now, and at the age of 15, he lost his mother in a car accident. She died right in front of him, and for many years he had struggled with um, dealing with the loss of his mother. And then he had come to grips with the fact that in order to pay tribute to his mom, he had to uh, find a way to be more human connected. So he took up fighting, and then he took up podcasting because he wanted to be a beacon of hope for other people by sharing his story. So I think, to answer your original questions, the stories that get me out of bed in the morning are the human connection stories, the stories that allow me to connect with people on a more human level, for them to share their own individual stories.
Absolutely. I think that's pretty brilliant actually, because it's only when you actually take a look at the world around you do you actually become knowledgeable of what is really going on with others, because we all tend to look at things through our own lenses, through our own personal experiences. But we also have to understand that someone else in another part of the world or wherever may not have the same experience that you do, may not have the same lifestyle choices, or may not have the same way of looking at a situation the way you do. So I think it's very important to understand where people come from, and have that layer of empathy, which I can certainly see that you have.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is I think journalism now has a moral responsibility, not necessarily an ethical responsibility, but a moral obligation when it's feasible to create a sense of unity and understanding. Because I do think part of journalism and part of life is the discourse of debate, and I think we've lost our ability to objectively disagree and have a healthy debate without uh, compromising someone else's integrity. So the reason I say that journalism and journalists have a moral obligation is because we have a platform as journalists to report the news, obviously objectively, but sometimes I think we have to look for angles of a story that create unity and understanding, which may also create disagreement, which is fine, but it also is important. Debate is a good thing. Debate is a way we reach consensus, or have a way of making informed decisions. But I think there's a way we can create unity and a way we can create an educated public without denigrating the other side, which I think all too often in our 24-hour news cycle, if you're not uh, in agree in agreement with one particular set of facts or circumstances, then we're quick to cast you off. Now, as a journalist, you have to remain objective, but again, I do think there's a moral responsibility to sort of weigh both sides of the story and make sure that we can bring people together through objective reporting as much as we can.
When you mentioned civil discourse, I it made me remember a, I can't the story. I'm just forgetting the story at this point in time. But when you mention civil discourse to me, I think there's definitely a need for civil discourse in this world. uh, Today, it's like you said, it's you're either on one side or you're on the other side, and there's no middle ground. And there seems to be people who just bash each other at all points in time if you don't agree with them, be it on the left, be it on the right, and there seems to be no one sitting down and actually having a conversation. So your podcast, let's have a conversation, I think is pretty awesome. Let's have this conversation. I think that's something which is so necessary in this day and age, where people just don't pay attention to each other, and I don't think it used to be like this in the past. And for some reason, in modern times, I think ever since maybe the late 2000s, it's just been getting worse and worse and worse and worse, with two sides of the media are just butting heads with each other. You look at social media, like everyone is just at each other's throats. Why do you think that civil discourse is so lacking in this day and age?
Well, I think the 24-hour news cycle has played a big role in this, and I also think the more conservative media, or the way people consume information, whether it be through their politicians, whether it be through the media, whether it be through their social media sources. I think so many people have decided to only get their information from one source. And as a journalist, I always challenge people to watch 10 to 20 minutes of another network where they may uh, have dissenting viewpoints, because I think so many people are influenced by what they see on Facebook or what they see on Twitter or what they see on the news. Now, as a news person, I would hope that objectivity is somewhere in the middle of the haze of information where they're getting. But I think, to answer your original question, I think so many people are consumed with only considering one side of a particular issue, uh, and people are more quick to go through or associate themselves with media or people who share the same opinion, and they're closed off to considering the other side of the argument. So I think, I always tell people never close your mind off to learning, because the minute you do that, then you really have compromised your understanding of an issue and your ability to be objective. So I do think people have sort of closed their mind off to learning, and that they're really entrenched in one position over the other. And I think that's dangerous for not only our political or social democracy, but I think it's it's dangerous in terms of the views that we hold in order to reach an objective and fair assessment or judgment on a particular issue, whether it be societal, political, media, or otherwise. So I think people have to open up their minds to learning. And just because you disagree with someone doesn't necessarily mean everything they're saying is cause for a nuclear war on social media or in person as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned the way people consume the media and the fact that they get their information mostly from one source. And that is so true, because I know people who would only watch MSNBC or CNN, and I know others who will only watch Fox News and share stories from Fox News. And really what it plays into is that bias, right? Because these media outlets, they are essentially biased towards their own political agendas. And I think social media also plays a big factor in the fact that we don't have discourse today, because you see people getting shut down left, right, and center on social media. You just see the way people talk to each other in the comment sections on Twitter or on Facebook. It's crazy. I mean, you wouldn't have people talking like that in real life. If those two people met in person, you know, I can guarantee you a full 100%. I'll put all my money on the line that they are not going to talk the same way that they were talking to each other on social media. So it's very strange. It's a very strange time that we live in. I think social media in a way has sort of amplified that issue um, to a tremendous degree.
Yeah, Ken, I would simply say this. I know I'm in the minority here, but I don't post anything on social media I don't want other people to see, because people are so quick to read something on Twitter and then form an opinion without gathering facts. And this is coming from a media perspective, because I'm a journalist, right? And I think that uh, it's done sort of a disservice to the media profession, in the sense that if you see it on the internet or you see it on Twitter, it automatically has to be true, right?
Hmm.
Without doing any further investigation, people form these opinions that aren't necessarily accurate, and then it's the media said this, the media is responsible for this, while you're in this situation as a journalist, then you're saying, are you going to be sucked into the the conspiracy of what you see on Twitter, or are you going to use the platform to be a principled journalist in the sense of uh, objectively looking at an issue and then laying out the facts and then allowing people to make their own decisions? Now, I know that social media is set up for a lot of people for instant gratification, and a lot of people only go to social media sites that agree with their own opinions. And when you do that, then, like you said earlier, the the conversation about discourse is amplified, right? Because we're all territorial because we want our positions on an issue to be correct. And as a objective journalists, you want all sides of an issue to be considered before you make a decision. So I think as a society in general, we have to become less territorial and protective of our um, viewpoints on certain issues. It's fine to have a strong opinion or an objective opinion on something. I'm simply asking people to do their homework on both sides of an issue before they reach a conclusion.
Definitely. People definitely need to do their homework. With all this, I know the QAnon conspiracy theories are just insane. And I had the thing is when you get sucked into this loop of conspiracy theories and um, fake news, so to say, it can get when you get into this rabbit hole, it can get very detrimental. And unfortunately, social media, particularly Facebook, I know for a fact, feeds you media and content that you usually would interact with. So, for example, if Facebook finds out that you're a Trump supporter, it'll push content which supports Trump to you. And that in itself, while I get the logic behind that, it can be very dangerous because, like you said, you don't get to see the other side of the argument. You don't get to see the other side of the aisle at all.
Yeah, and again, I think uh, going back to my point about being territorial, I think people have become so cynical to the media process and the way media presents information. And again, this is coming from someone who wants the media to still have an objective place in the world. But I think you have to be naive not to see that the media and the way information is presented plays into this discussion as well. Because I think people, as we had mentioned earlier, they consume information with only the sources of information that agree with their opinions. And this is frustrating not only as a journalist, but as a person, where you can have a debate or discussion with someone and then you point out factual information, and then they go back to their original argument without consuming the information that is factual as a base of fact. So as a journalist and as a person, that has to be a mission for me if I want to be an objective journalist, is to make sure that people aren't so territorial when they consider information.
hmm to your point, I did a podcast with this guy named Amr Sheikh. He is the founder of a startup news agency called 4B, which I believe stands for the Fourth Branch of Parliament. This guy, he is much like you. He's all for civil discourse, and he's all for everyone speaking their opinion and free speech. Um, he started when he started 4B. He had the idea of bringing in two sides to the story for a single story. So, for example, on let's talk about abortion, for example. Um, you have people who are for abortion, and you have people who are against abortion. And when he puts out his stories on his platform, he gets writers who are both for and against to write on the same topic, and he will put it together in one post. And at the end of the post, he will ask the viewers for their opinions, and he'll ask them questions like, do you think abortion should be made illegal? uh, do you do you think there are any other potential ramifications for abortion? Certain things like that, really. So basically, he's getting the viewer as well to participate in the discussion, and not just even pushing it. So I think that is a fantastic platform. So I'm not promoting him, or he's not paying me or anything, but I think he's what he's doing is also tremendously good for this day and age.
Yeah, I think the more objectives, what, and all I'm asking people is to look at both sides of an argument before they form an opinion. And I think any way we can do that in an objective manner is a good thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so when I do my podcast, I try and get people on with diverse views and diverse opinions myself. The other week, a couple of weeks ago, I gotten this guy who believes the Earth is flat, and I don't agree with him at all in terms of anything that he was saying, because there was no science behind what he was really saying. But it's very interesting. Much like you, I find it very interesting and fascinating to understand people from where they come from and why they believe what they believe. I think having conversations like that is very, very helpful. So even if you have a disagreement with someone and you don't agree with everything that they say, no one if you take a look at it this way, in a movie, you have the good guys and you have the bad guys, right? The protagonist and the antagonist. A movie that is made well, the antagonist, you sort of empathize for the guy because you understand where he's coming from. He may be doing things the wrong way, but you still understand his motivations for doing that. And in his eyes, he's not the antagonist. The good guy is the antagonist, right? So we all have our own motivations for doing the things that we do. But certain people may not agree with it, certain people may disagree with it. But at the same time, we don't feel that we are the bad guys. We always feel the others are the bad guys, right? So it's important, it's tremendously important to have these debates and to have these conversations and to find that middle ground, because we need to find middle ground in this at this point in time, and I think that's tremendously lacking.
Yeah, healthy debate leads to informed and relevant decisions, right? And I think healthy debate's a good thing. But again, I keep going back to this territorial argument, but I think if we can get back to the point where we have uh, healthy debate instead of territorial uh,
Hmm.
entrenchment, for lack of a better word, where we're all entrenched in one side of an argument without considering the other side. And I'm not saying you always have to agree and sing kumbaya, but what I am saying is we've gotten so polarized, and I think the last American president helped with that tremendously.
Hmm.
and
I agree.
and I think he opened a box of worms that that allowed certain people who want to be entrenched in an argument to have cover to do that without debating the merit of the other side. And I think the easiest way to sum up this discussion is if you have a way of considering objectively the merits of the other side through debate and disagreement, because I truly believe that a diversity of opinions is a good thing in life, because that's the way you grow individually as people. So I think diversity is what breeds acceptance, and I think we have to get back to a way to having more diverse discussions on everything that revolves around life. Because if you ask certain people uh, if the sky is blue these days, they'll tell you there's a hint of green in it. So I think when we look at societal disagreement, I think that's terrific. But I also think, like I've mentioned multiple times, uh, inciting only one way of looking at an issue is a mistake. And all I ask people is to lay both sides of an argument on the table before putting the whole puzzle together, if that makes any sense.
Do you think that there is a way for us to find commonalities and common ground in the future going forward? Or do you think we are just so divided at this point that, that seems like a dot on the horizon, that prospect?
You know, I think I always tell people that they make time for the arguments they want to hear. So I think if we can convince more people to listen instead of drawing conclusions all the time. I'm an optimistic person by nature. I'm an eternal optimist. So there's always room for improvement and discussion. But I think people have to listen to both sides. If they don't listen, then this whole discussion is mute because they're so entrenched in their argument. But I think if we can sit down with people and have a legitimate discussion and ask them why they view a certain issue a certain way, and then offer an opposing viewpoint, and then because that's the way you build consensus. You lay your uh, viewpoint on the table, you consider another viewpoint or multiple different viewpoints, and then you try to come to a consensus of a decision. Now, I'm not naive to think that overnight people are going to suddenly value objectivity, but I do think there's an olive branch or an avenue for people to open up their minds again to knowledge and understanding of a certain issue. And I think returning to a healthy debate is the only way to get back to some level of civil discourse where we can agree to debate and disagree without denigration. So I think the key to your question is to be having the ability to open up our minds to listening again.
You mentioned that that you're an optimistic person. I can certainly see how optimistic you are, and just by the tone of your voice and the way you speak about things with so much passion. Were you always an optimist? Given the fact that you're born with this disability, and you've had, I can imagine, a pretty rough childhood. Were you always this optimistic in life?
You know, like I said earlier, we're all presented with obstacles. Just whether you have a disability or you don't, we all have obstacles or disagreements in life. And I had a decision to make at a very young age whether I was going to let the disability define who I was or let my personality define the principles in which I wanted to stand. And I chose to decide to allow my actions to determine my principles and my principles to determine my actions. And I think if more people would adopt that philosophy, I think we would be in a much better place. So, uh, to answer your question, I will die on the sword of being optimistic because uh, because I believe that's the only way we can achieve diversity.
That put a tremendous smile on my face, because your words are very powerful, honestly, and you use your platform for so much good. And I've seen the good that you do, and it's something that you don't see very many people doing, and especially for someone like yourself. When you were initially diagnosed with this disorder, what was this like? Can you tell us a little bit more about it, just so I can understand exactly what the disability is all about?
Yeah, so spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy uh, is the name of my diagnosis. And I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at birth. I was actually born 3 months premature. I was supposed to be born March 15th, and I showed up at the middle of January 32 years ago. And my disability simply means that my muscle movement, muscle memory, and muscle dexterity is affected. So that means that I can't stand for long periods of time. My handwriting is affected. My muscles, in terms of their movements, are spastic. And that simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my muscles to walk or to function normally. But again, those are my circumstances. So instead of allowing my circumstances to dictate my lot in life, I'm allowing my circumstances to be a part of my story of perseverance. And I think if more people look at how their stories of perseverance can positively contribute to the world, then I think we would be in a much better place.
I that's something which I can completely get behind, really, because too many people wallow in their own misery and don't really try as hard to get to where they want, simply because they feel that they're not capable of doing so, and then you have an individual like yourself who, despite all of these setbacks you've had in life, have managed to make such a big name for yourself. You've won a bunch of awards as well. You sent me a bio when you first emailed, and I was looking through it, and I don't even remember the names of the awards, but you've won a bunch of awards for the work that you've done. So, that's pretty amazing, and that goes to show that, regardless of whatever things might be going on in your life, be it good or bad, you can always make it to the top, given the fact that you persevere in the face of resistance. And I think that is tremendously important.
Yeah, I think for me personally, the awards are humbling, obviously, but I don't do the work for the rewards. I do the work because I always tell people, and this is how I also live my life, is what are you willing to do to contribute to the a greater good for a better tomorrow? And if you always are so, for a lack of a better term, hyperventilated in defending your position, then you're not going to be open to the possibility that the other position with some tweaks may be the way you can go. So I think people, when you look at the way you want your legacies to be remembered, I always challenge people to consider what they're willing to do to contribute to the greater good for a better tomorrow. And if they can answer that question objectively, then I think our uh, uh, our struggle for unity um, can be more wholesome in the fact that we can bridge the gap of divide closer to what a more perfect, imperfect union is supposed to look like, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It does. Do you have any message for anyone who is struggling with a disability or anything in their life where, if they feel that they cannot move forward because of something that's gone wrong?
Yeah, I think my message would be what I shared with you earlier is that we're all given circumstances and we're all given the same 24 hours and 365 days in a year. And I think when we look at our lives and the way we want to be viewed, uh, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make decisions. You can either allow your circumstances to define you, or you can define your circumstances. I think that would be my message: is to define your own circumstances and your own individual legacy. Because I always tell people also that their portrait of success doesn't necessarily have to comport with an artificial view of what it's supposed to look like. Everybody's portrait of success is supposed to be different, right? Again, it goes back to diversity breeds opportunity. And I think if we all live by the creed that diversity breeds opportunity, then we can stake out our own individual niche in order to contribute to a better tomorrow.
Totally. People need to take responsibility for their own lives, I feel, and to run with that responsibility, because no one else is going to take responsibility for your life for you. And in all honesty, we all have our own lives to lead. We have our own issues. We have our own problems. So no one else is going to do that for you besides yourself. So to take responsibility and to is to be and to be all that you can be is something which I feel is tremendously important in this day and age. It's tremendously important overall, actually, not just in this day and age. It's tremendously important overall, to and that's why we can persevere, and that's why we can achieve greater things, and it can even start with something small, like, for example, cleaning up your room, right? um I see a lot of people who sort of wallow in their own misery, really. And it's kind of sad in a way to see that, because you have to start somewhere, right? And sometimes you need a little more motivation to start. If you're starting with something bigger. But what I always tell people is to start with something small, right? And that something small could be something as tiny as, maybe you don't feel like getting up and doing your laundry. Just go and do your laundry, right? You feel a little bit accomplished at the end of the day by just doing something so tiny, right? Clean up your room, right? Surround yourself with beauty, right? Because if you are surrounded by beauty and your room is organized, to me, I think that is extremely important, because that in itself also clears your mind, and that helps you, with pushing forward and starting to do something else, and then pushing forward and trying to do something else. And I feel we all make mistakes along the way, right? We all make mistakes. We are all human. But I always look at mistakes as a learning opportunity, because when you make that mistake, and if it's a big mistake, you're damn sure you're never going to make that mistake again. So that's the way that's the way I really feel about it, in all honesty.
Yeah, and I would add two things to that, to what you just said. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I think that stumbling is the key to being successful in life. If you're afraid to fail in life, then you'll never allow yourself to grow as a person. If you're pigeonholing yourself into a view of life that other people have carved out for you, then you don't have a chance to define. I'm a big person, big believer in defining your own personal identity. And if
Mhm.
you are pigeonholed yourself into another way of life that someone else wants you to become, then you rob yourself, or you are absent of your own individual capabilities to make decisions, to form opinions, or to have sort of your own view on how to operate your own life. Because I think diversity is the key to acceptance of knowledge and of understanding of the way the world is. And I think if you're uh, indep- independently capable of making those individual decisions, I think it's very important in terms of forming um, forming decisions and forming stances on issues, big, small, or indifferent. So I would agree with you in that sense.
So going forward, what is your future going to hold for you?
Well, then that's a large question. Um, One of the things that I'm hoping is that my podcast becomes of national importance, and I am able to communicate to people on a national level on the importance of inclusion and acceptance and equity and equality. But to answer your question, I'd love to take the platform to be a national speaker on these issues, or a reporter that allows for both issues to be heard. So I have a hodgepodge of goals, but if I had to narrow it down to a couple, it would be to create a national platform of difference, and to give each side equal and unbiased unbiased direction on sharing their stories, because I think for me, always be a storyteller, and if I can do that on a national level of and sort of restore objectivity in journalism and in life and in societal discourse, then my future and present legacy, I think would be defined that way.
That's amazing. Any immediate plans though?
Well, immediate plans is to, I'll tell you, the reason I started the podcast was my contract got suspended, so I had some extra time, right? So
Mhm.
my immediate plans is once COVID is over, to use the platform to sort of elevate myself, to get back into the working discourse of the world, and try to uh, use this platform that I've created to myself, for myself, to make uh, an immediate difference, whether that's through journalism or public speaking or through communications. That would be my immediate short-term view of way the way I view my current obligations, or view on the world.
And I wish you all the best with that. I think you have a tremendously passionate voice, and more people deserve to hear what you have to say and look at you and and take inspiration, in all honesty. So whatever you're doing at this point in time, you have my best wishes, you have my best regards. And if I can do anything to support you in this endeavor, I would love to be of assistance. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me. It has been a very valuable and insightful conversation that we've had so far, and I look forward to doing it again in the future sometime.
Fantastic, Ken. I really want to thank you for having me, for your best wishes, and I look forward to staying in touch and hopefully helping other people uh, see both sides of an issue, because I believe that we're both committed to the fact that debate and public discussion is a positive instead of a negative. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I want to thank you for having me this morning. It's much appreciated.
It's my pleasure. It's my absolute pleasure. And before we go, do you have any links or any social media which I can direct people to go and check out your stuff?
Yeah, people can check out the podcast on YouTube under the name Let's Have This Conversation, and then just tap my name in afterwards. And they can also follow me on LinkedIn just under my name. My Twitter handle is my last name, which is McShan819. My Instagram handle is Kevin McShan 81509. And they can find me on all social medias under my name, under the links that I gave you, and I post all my stuff on social media as well.
Fantastic. I'll even put a link in the description for the video and for the podcast, for the audio podcast, so people can go and check it out over there. So, with that being said, thank you once again, and keep in touch. Keep in touch, please. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm an open book. Would love to speak to you more, and I would love to support you in all of your endeavors.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And I always am open to making positive connections with people such as you. So I appreciate the olive branch, and I'm going to take you up on that invitation for sure. For sure. It was great to
Absolutely.
be with you this morning, and have a great Vancouver Saturday. Would you?
I would definitely have a great Saturday if it wasn't snowing. It's the first snow of the season today in Vancouver, and the city is completely flooded. It's a mess. All right, so I'm gonna end it right here, and speak to you soon.
Fantastic. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye bye.